All right, so let's pick back up with the internal spinal cord anatomy. The gray matter of the spinal cord is a butterfly-shaped structure found within the spinal cord. It is surrounded by two tracts of white matter, in the spinal cord cross section. The central canal is filled with cerebrospinal fluid. It's found in the center of the spinal cord. It's surrounded by two strips of gray matter, which connects each of those butterfly-looking wings. Anterior to posterior orientation of the spinal cord can be determined by using the shape and size of the gray matter wings. The anterior wings are broader and thinner, where the posterior wings extend almost to the outer surface of the spinal cord. The gray matter makes up three distinct regions. Within the spinal cord, the gray matter houses the neurons with specific functions that include certain things like the anterior horn, for instance. The anterior wing of the gray matter gives rise to the anterior motor nerve roots. The neural cell bodies in this region is involved with somatic motor functions, aka skeletal or like skeletal muscle contraction. The posterior or dorsal horn is the posterior wing of the gray matter, gives rise to the posterior sensory nerve roots. The neuron cell bodies in this region process incoming somatic and visceral information. The lateral horn is only in the spinal cord between the first thoracic and the lumbar region, contains cell bodies and neurons that control the viscera via the autonomic nervous system. And there is the butterfly-shaped gray matter surrounded by the white matter. There's the central canal. There's the gray commissure right there. The anterior, almost coming to the surface, much more narrow posterior horns. The regions coming off the posterior region go to things like the skin and the visceral sensory, such as the rectum and the spinal, intestine. The anterior horns lead to things like the skeletal muscles and the bladder control. Whoops. The spinal white matter, ascending and descending tracts contain axons of neurons that travel to and from the brain. They allow the spinal cord to fulfill one of its primary functions, that is that of a relay station. The white matter is organized into general regions called funiculi. There are three of them. There's the posterior funiculus, the lateral funiculus, and the anterior funiculus. They lie on each side of the spinal cord. The features of the funiculi, each one is organized into tracts or columns. They are bilaterally symmetrical. In other words, they have a left and right side. The left and right side of the spinal cord have identical tracts serving their respective side of the body. So white matter on the left side that controls lung function. There's one on the right side that controls lung function. And ascending and descending tracts bring information to and from specific parts of the brain. Those pathways are called sensory pathways. The sensory pathways travel in the posterior and lateral funiculi, while motor pathways travel in the anterior and lateral funiculi. The posterior columns found within the posterior funiculus make up two tracts. You have the medial fasciculus gracilis and the lateral fasciculus cutaneus. These contain somatosensory information, touch, feel, those kinds of things. The nucleus gracilis transmits stimuli for the lower limbs and the lower trunk. The nucleus cutaneus transmits stimuli for the upper limbs and the upper trunk. The spinocerebral tracts, which are found in the lateral funiculi, carry information about joint position and muscle strength from the entire body to the cerebellum. The anterolateral system includes the spinothalamic tracts that travel within the anterior and lateral funiculi. These transmit pain and temperature stimuli from the entire body to the brain. And then here is a cross section showing the lateral funiculus, the posterior funiculi, the anterior funiculi. There's the spinocerebral tracts, the anterolateral system, posterior columns, and the fascius gracilis, all of those components, and then their functions listed for you there. The spinal white matter continues with descending tracts that transmit motor information from specific regions of the brain down the spinal cord. So therefore the name descending tracts. And they go down, again, the corticospinal tracts are the largest of the descending tracts. They help control skeletal muscles below the head and neck. They originate from motor areas of the cerebral cortex. They descend as part of the internal capsule and desiccate with the brainstem. Decussate, sorry. Travel through the lateral funiculi of the spinal cord. These fibers deliver motor information to the appropriate locations within the anterior horn. And again, here's those structures. There's the corticospinal tracts, the reticulospinal tracts, the tectospinal tract, and the vestibulospinal tract. All right. Sensation. Role of the central nervous system in sensation, or our sense of touch and feel. Sensory stimuli are those effects that cause senses to respond. Multiple sensory stimuli from different regions of the brain can be pulled together into a single mental picture. Each of these disparate stimuli reaches the brain in two pathways or two processes. Number one, stimulus gets detected by neurons of the peripheral nervous system and sent as a sensory input to the central nervous system. And in the central nervous system, sensory input is sent to the cerebral cortex for interpretation. When the central nervous system has received all of the different sensory inputs, it integrates them into a single perception. Perception is defined as the conscious awareness of the sensation. The sensation can be grouped into two basic types. You have the special senses and you have the general senses. The special senses are those detected by special sense organs like vision, hearing, equilibrium, smell, and taste. We'll talk about those in chapter 15. And then you have the general senses, which are detected by the motor neurons in the skin, muscles, and walls of the organs. These can further be subdivided into general motor senses that involve the skin, the muscles, and the joints, and the general visceral senses that involve the internal organs. And that first group is the general somatic senses. Somatic senses are, again, touch, stretch, pain, joint position, temperature. Two types of touch stimuli are delivered to the appropriate part of the cerebral cortex. Tactile senses, fine or discrimination of touch, include vibration, two-point discrimination, and light touch. Non-descriptive touch, or sometimes referred to as crude touch, lacks fine spatial resolution of tactile senses. With your tactile senses, you can tell whether something is a nickel or a dime. Non-descriptive, you can just, grab a doorknob. Most of the general somatic senses are considered mechanical senses. These neurons that detect them are responsive to mechanical deformation. In other words, the neuron itself is being deformed or it's changing shape, and that's the signal. Two major ascending tracts in the spinal cord carry somatic sensory information to the brain. You have your posterior columns and the medial and lemniscal system and the anterolateral system. First order neurons detect the initial stimuli within the peripheral nervous system. The axon of this neuron then synapses with a second order neuron. Second order neuron then is located in the posterior horn of the spinal cord or in the brainstem, depending on the signal, and it relays stimulus to a third order neuron. The third order neuron is the one that delivers the impulse to the cerebral cortex, and third order neurons are found in the thalamus. So here's the sensory, The sensation comes in, the first order neuron in the spinal cord sends it to the second order neuron in the brain stem, the thalamus, but then it transfers to the third order neuron in the cerebral cortex, and then we get the integration of the neurons in the cerebral cortex. The posterior columns are axons that carry or transmit tactile information about discriminative touch, and axons that convey information regarding proprioception. These ascend through the posterior columns. The medial fascialis gracilis carries impulse from the lower limbs. The fasciculus cutaneus carries the impulses from the upper limb and the trunk and neck. The posterior columns of the fasciculus gracilis and cutaneous, those axons enter the medulla. They synapse with second order neurons in the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cutaneous. The axons of the second order neurons then desicate, form tracts called the medial lemniscus. The fibers of the medial lemniscus ascend through the pons in the midbrain until they reach third order neurons in the thalamus, and those axons of the third order neurons proceed to cerebral cortex. So again, here's all the signals coming in, they go up, there's an integration, and then the signal's going to come back down to tell us to pick up our foot, to drop that pot, whatever the signal tells us to do. The anterolateral system, these fibers transmit pain, temperature, and non-discriminative touch into the anterolateral components of the spinal cord. The first order neurons, again, are going to synapse with second order neurons in the posterior horn. The spinothalamic tract, which is the largest member of the anterolateral system, will then transmit signals through the spinal cord to the sensory relay neurons or nuclei of the thalamus, where they will encounter third order neurons in the thalamus and transmit the impulse to the cerebral cortex. So again, there's finger on a pin, signal goes up through the medulla into the cerebrum, signal then is decimated across that area. The thalamus relays most incoming information about primary somatosensory cortex S1 in the postcentral gyrus. Each part of the body is represented by a specific region of the S1, the type of organization called somatotopy. The mapping of the primary somatosensory cortex illustrates that different parts of the body are unequally represented. There's more space dedicated to hands and face, which represents an importance of manual dexterity, facial expression, and speech to humans. Other animals, you will find that these areas are different because they require different components to spend their lives. This unequal representation of body parts in S1 is exemplified by what is referred to as the sensory homunculus. And there is the sensory homunculus based on brain activity. You see a lot of neurons for head and mouth area, a lot for face, others not so equally represented. So that is the somatosensory cortex. You can see as you look, get down here to hand, fingers, eyes, nose, face, lips, chin, teeth, tongue, throat, all of that portion of the brain. And then you get up here, you got head, neck, trunk. All right. The thalamic nuclei relay touch information from the spinothalamic tracts in the posterior columns primarily to S1 for conscious perception. Once sensory information reaches S1, it is processed, perceived, and passed along to cortical association areas. Within that somatosensory association cortex, or S2, there is a major role being played in processing sensory input and sending it on to the limbic system. The limbic system is involved in tactile learning and memory. S1 also sends sensory input to parietal and temporal association areas, and it also integrates and relays information to the motor areas of the frontal lobe. The thalamus then relays pain stimuli to several brain regions, including S1 and S2, where the sensory discrimination is perceived and analyzed. In other words, where's the pain, how intense is the pain, and what is the quality of the pain. Also sent to basal nuclei, or the signal is also sent to basal nuclei, regions of the limbic system, sent to the hypothalamus and the prefrontal cortex, where emotional and behavioral aspects of the brain are processed. The cerebral cortex appears to have a significant influence on perception and modulation. This is evident by a phenomenon called the placebo effect, where dummy treatment with no active painkiller ingredients produces pain relief. I can tell you a personal story from my past. I had a maternal great uncle, my mother's uncle, who was a chronic pain sufferer. He was chronically in pain. There was something always wrong with him. And he kept insisting that he needed a medication for his pain. I think it was his back, or I don't remember. But we suspected that he didn't have a whole lot of pain because he ran a little small general store in the town where I grew up, and he always seemed to be able to do his work for his store. But when it came to just sitting around with family and friends, oh, I'm in so much pain, I can't hardly stand it. So my mother and one of her sisters got together with this particular uncle had no children. But one of my mother and one of her sisters got together and went to the pharmacy and bought empty capsules. In those days, you could buy empty capsules, and I think you still can in like health food stores and those kinds of places to make your own supplements. But anyway, they filled those little capsules with powdered sugar and gave those to him, claiming it was a prescription from the doctor. Told him he was supposed to take one of them a day with his breakfast, and he never complained about his back injury again. So, was he actually in pain and the medication helped, the placebo effect, or was there really no pain and he just thought that the medication was doing him some good? All right, so placebo effect. A descending pathway originating mostly in the S1, the amygdala, or within the S1 amygdala and the region of the midbrain called the periaqueductal gray matter, provides explanation of the placebo effect. These neurons in the periaqueductal gray matter release neurotransmitters called endorphins, and we've all heard of endorphins. The role of the cerebral cortex, these endorphins decrease sensitivity to pain stimuli in the posterior horns of the neurons. Pain input is still present, however, the intensity is unaffected. The central nervous system perceives pain as being less intense or absent, and we have another example of the cell-to-cell communication. Phantom limb pain, you may have heard of this. I've seen several things about it recently with soldiers coming back from being hit by IEDs, etc., and they lose an arm or a leg. Phantom pain occurs after the amputation of a limb, digit, or even a breast. Patients perceive the body part is still present and functioning in the absence of any sensory input. A small percentage of these people will develop what is called phantom pain, a burning or tingling, sometimes even severe pain in the missing part. It's difficult to treat due to the complex way the central nervous system processes pain, but it supports the idea that the S1 has a map of the body that exists independently of the peripheral nervous system. Over time, the map generally rearranges itself so the body is represented accurately and the phantom pain sensations decrease. The special senses include vision, hearing, taste, and olfaction. Hearing is scientifically referred to as audition. Taste is gustation. Smell is olfaction. And then balance is vestibular sensation. Each one of these involves neurons that detect stimuli and send it to the central nervous system for processing and integration. The gateway for the entry of this information is the thalamus. The signal is then sent to the cerebral cortex, where the cerebral cortex will do the major part of the interpreting of this information. The exception to that is olfaction, or the sense of smell. Visual, most of the stimuli is sent directly to the thalamus. Then it's relayed to the primary visual cortex, which processes the stimuli, perceives an object's depth, color, detects rapid changes in stimuli. The information is shared with the association areas in the temporal and parietal lobes, and that is crucial for object recognition and spatial awareness. Auditory stimuli first go to the nuclei in the brainstem, where transmitting or limited processing occurs. So we back up one slide. So visual goes straight to the thalamus. Whoops. Auditory straight to the brainstem, which should tell you that hearing or auditory things are a more ancient sense than vision. The majority of the stimuli are routed to the thalamus and then primary auditory cortex for sound processing. Information is relayed to other association areas, such as Wernicke's areas, where we comprehend language. Gustatory stimuli are sent to the nuclei in the medulla. Again, taste in the medulla, more ancient than vision. Before being relayed to the thalamus, then in the thalamus, it's sent to gustatory cortices found within the insula and the parietal lobes. That information is then sent to the hypothalamus and to the limbic system, likely for processing for taste preferences and food-seeking behavior. This is where the folks who like to eat things or are driven to eat things that aren't food, like the lady on Oprah who liked to eat those red clay pots, those terracotta pots. She would break those up and nibble on them. This probably was something in her gustatory system that was off balance, maybe a chemical imbalance or something along those lines. Olfactory stimuli enter the limbic system of the cerebral cortex for initial processing, bypassing the thalamus. Okay, we're now getting into the really ancient types of senses, the ones that have been around for long periods of time. Then sent to several regions of the brain, including the thalamus, the prefrontal cortex, the hypothalamus, and other limbic system components. This allows smell stimuli to influence behavior such as emotion, cognition, and those related to feeding. Again, we smell something, we get hungry. You smell something and you think of something from your past. I always, whenever I smell bread, baking, or rolls in the oven, it always takes me back to my childhood around the holidays, because my house would just permeate with the smells of cooking. And it seems that, excuse me, the breads and the rolls and all of that seems to trigger those for me more than, the smell of turkey or whatever. Balance is processes within the vestibular stimuli, or processing of vestibular stimuli involves several nuclei within the brainstem, the cerebellum, the depending pathways through the spinal cord, and pathways through the cerebral cortices. All right. Let's stop there, and we'll pick up at another time.